Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Had a really good last couple of weeks, Steve. It was quite exciting watching the women's soccer, and the Matildas were doing really well all the way through this World Cup. I've got the the Italian DNA in me, so by default I have to watch soccer. But it's always exciting when an Australian team does really well, and the thing that really there's a couple of things that sort of stood out for me was that it's like the women's version of soccer, which is basically the same thing, obviously, finally is getting like kind of the proper recognition that it deserves. And I don't know about you, but like in terms of excitement of watching the game, I didn't see any difference between the women's game and the men's game from as far as I can tell, but I can see a similar ethic from the Australian team on from both the men's and the women's. Like, there's always the joke in soccer of the theatrics of trips and working the ref and wasting time to put the clock down, and the Australians, both men's and women's, are I find they don't play like that. They play quite straight, direct, and just go for it, which is quite refreshing. But overall, it's been a big win overall the last couple of weeks, just to get that visibility, and especially for the women's game.
Oh, I totally agree, Ben. It's been marvellous watching the Matildas play and see them succeed. And look, to be honest, and I'm not much of an expert, but I'd probably say they've finished way above expectation, and probably even, to be fair, probably above, where they really sit in the world scheme. But, hats off to them, because you've got to play, you've got to win, you've got to get ahead, and they did, and just wonderful. And maybe a bit disappointing at the end, but only because we wanted them to go all the way. So fantastic, made me very proud to be Australian and watch them play. And the reference to the men's game and the women's game, I think there are aspects of the women's game that are better to watch than the men's. And goodness, Sam Kerr's strike against England. Would you see a better goal in any code, male or female? Absolutely sensational.
Certainly brought the house down, let me say that. And the other thing too that's excited me about this is that obviously there's, because the men's game and the women's game are 1 year after another, you basically got a double header across 2 years now, now that they're effectively promoting it quite well.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and let's hope that both our men's and women's side can continue their successes in the World Cups.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get back to world shenanigans, and we haven't spoken about Donald Trump for a while. Maybe it was due, especially after last week talking about X and Elon Musk's antics. We had to kind of revisit the wheel, and I've kind of held off on this. I deliberately didn't want to speak about Trump as often as what we used to during the heyday when he was in office, but it was probably time to revisit it, only because the fourth of the expected indictments finally came down, the state one in Georgia about the election interference. So now the ones that all the indictments that everyone was predicting he was going to receive have now actually come to pass, which would seem to me to indicate this is going to be a crazy 18 months of, well, I guess it's less than 18 months now in this current election cycle. And we're going to be in for a wild ride watching US politics from afar, I would say.
Oh, well, yes. I think when we were talking about Trump a lot, we got to the stage where we were saying quite frequently we didn't know what to make of it. I don't know what to make of this. I mean, obviously the charges are serious. Obviously they're real. But he's a very Teflon coated kind of guy, and nothing seems to stop him. In fact, he, as we've seen probably over the last 8 years or longer, he takes this stuff in his stride, and he in fact uses it to empower himself. And so these sorts of charges seem to enable him to run as a more effective candidate. It's counterintuitive, as you said. It's crazy, and it's almost impossible to predict where or how this will go.
And the funny thing is that any one of these individual charges would have taken down any other candidate. Yeah, he's he's still standing. And ironically, what you were just saying, just to speak to that, there's potential that 3 of the indictments he might be able to test the limit of what's possible in terms of what he can get away with. There's a lot of evidence, etc., on the 2 cases related to the election interference. There's the hush money case, which is a separate thing, but the one that he might be in the most easiest danger of something actually like a negative result for him is the documents case, only because it's so straightforward. And it just makes me wonder the implications of what all of that is, because he's really ramping it up to try and sort of take it from a political angle and try and beat the indictments politically, which, if were to come to pass, that's going to strike right at the core of what the US is about, I would have thought.
Absolutely. I mean, notionally, it's a very serious offence. I mean, I don't know. I haven't followed closely enough to know if they've actually released exactly what those documents were. I know they've alluded to what they are, but I mean, who takes documents like that home? I mean, it's crazy. So there's got to be more to this than meets the eye, and I'm sure somebody somewhere has joined the dots, and this could open up, and if they do actually release the full details and what the intent or the reason for holding those files were, I think we're going to see some very serious charges.
Absolutely. Well, we'll watch that that play out. Maybe we don't come back to it until next year because I think we reached that point where Trump was just exhausting by the end of our coverage, just like everyone else was exhausted by it. But I think it's still, this particular story has a significance and could have some historical ramifications depending on what happens, and it most likely will be talked about for some time, depending on which way it goes.
Yeah, no question of that.
All right, and just finally, I do a lot of watching of YouTube, because there's lots of useful stuff on there, and as I've said before freely, I watch a lot of tech videos by a lot of prominent YouTube creators. Curiously, almost all of them are based in America and Canada. A lot in Canada actually, and they actually are quite good. They're well resourced. They're well produced. We've had episodes before. We've talked about studio setups for these guys. I'd love to have some of that as well if you had the cash to pay for it. But a new story came out about the Linus Media Group, and in particular Linus Tech Tips, and the subsequent YouTube channels associated with that company. And I've watched Linus off and on from time to time as well, because he does, or I thought he did some good coverage of PC hardware specifically, etc., etc. But what caught my attention here, which is, it obviously blew up as a controversy, was that I just saw a video come up in the feed with his face on it that said something along the lines of, "What do we do now?" And it's like, oh, okay. So I hit play, and then it's not him. It's like his board on the company, one by one, explaining that they're going to cease production. They're going to investigate all the claims that were made against them, which it would appear to be a combination of journalistic ethics being breached, for lack of a better term, and then some more worrying HR matters that surfaced, and as a result of that, Linus is sort of towards the end of the pack of interviews where he's actually saying that he's accepted a demotion to Chief Vision Officer as opposed to the CEO, and it all just seems like quite unsavory, I guess, if for lack of a better term. But what also sort of stuck out to me is that I thought a lot of these guys and women as well were just individuals. They started a channel, they got big, they started making money, then they started hiring people to help them. And I thought that it was a very sort of tight-knit sort of startup type situation where it wasn't necessarily incorporated or like a huge concern in terms of that. But they seem to have run into the classic company kind of traditional company issue of when things like this happen. And then the question is that, they've all been part of the Wild West for so long, trailblazing their way through, media reporting on tech, etc. And it turns out they're stumbling into some areas that a lot of traditional media companies and other companies as well have have found themselves in when something goes wrong.
Well, that's it. You've hit the nail on the head there, Ben. It would have been so much fun when they started it all up and they were just hanging around and doing content videos, and next minute they start making money. But it's still fun, and you're hiring some good equipment, you're getting better equipment, you're getting better products, you're making more money, and you're loving life. You're on top of YouTube. It's brilliant. And then you think, well, like I could get a bit more investment and we could turn this into a really happening startup, and I can be CEO of my own startup, and we'll just keep on making content and doing things the way we've been doing it. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be fun. It's going to be excellent. But as soon as you become a company, certain responsibilities go with being on the board of that company, and certain responsibilities come with being CEO of your own startup. And I think this is a classic instance here where the roots of the company, are very different to an actual corporate structure and a corporate culture. And I think every charge that's been made against them stems from that. So it's unfortunate. It's sad, it's probably wrong, but it's happened. And now they're going to have to go through Finkenstein's process, where, they're going to have to come out and apologise. They're going to have to say it wasn't really their fault, and then they have to come out and say that it'll never happen again. And then they'll just all get on with it, I guess.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it steps into this area of when personal ethics cross over into work ethics, and that the two things are actually discrete entities, for lack of a better term. And you have to be careful because personal ethics are whatever you think is ethical, and then there's the work ethics or the company ethics, which is a set of ethics to, I guess, maintain integrity in that company, or a perceived integrity in that company, a public perception of that company. And I think in these particular situations where it started in a personal space and then morphed into this sort of company structure where more considerations were concerned, you'd have to be it's hard. I can imagine that would be a very hard transition to make if you're not aware or are not being advised of the pitfalls that are associated when you make that transition, because it wouldn't have been an off and on thing. It wouldn't have happened overnight. They were, went from a little YouTube channel to a big company making big money or whatever. It would have been a gradual thing. And there was a lot of blurring of lines, like maybe even mentally, just trying to keep on top of all of that.
Oh, look, I think you're right. And you made this point when we were talking before, but, this is effectively someone who's gone from being an influencer to being a corporation. And, we all know that influencers can be careless with the truth and, embellish and say what they like, because after all, they're just people and whatever they're doing is just entertainment. But once you become a company, well, then there are certain laws that restrict you from lying or cheating or providing an unsafe workplace. And, if you want to be CEO, you really need to be across that. And any management that's in place within that organisation needs to ensure that, corners aren't being cut and people aren't doing the wrong thing. And I really don't think that oversight was present in this organisation.
Yeah, and just finally, and I think this is a more broader issue beyond this particular story, is the idea of what happens when you transition from being small to being a large concern, say, like in the sense of audience. So you're now reaching people. People are listening to you. People are taking your opinions they're reacting to them, they're acting on them, etc., etc. And I think there's that broader issue. Obviously, influencers are sitting in that murky grey area where they can get away with things, but it does, beg the question, like across the board, whether you've got like a huge podcast or you've got any sort of reach where you can actually influence people and what they're saying, that it almost by definition, even if you don't want anything to do with it, you can't get away from the integrity component of what you're doing. So in other words, you can't just go, once you establish that kind of influence in the public, you can't just go off tangent and do whatever you want, with at least without consequences.
That's absolutely correct. And, I think, you have to be mindful of that. What starts as fun, if you start to make money, becomes a very serious business.
Absolutely. All right, well, we'll watch that one. I guess I won't be seeing any videos from Linus anytime soon. It would seem. I, had him on the queue there. I'll just have to watch some of the others. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
It will, and let's hope that for his sake, that they can work through it.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. So don't forget to check out our website, SciTechCulture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels, our RSS feeds, and watch us on any and all of your devices. And we greatly appreciate your visits to our website. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.